Tonight, the US blames an Iran-backed group for a deadly drone strike on one of its Mid-East military bases. Fresh ceasefire talks again aim for a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas. Thousands demonstrate across Germany against the rise of far-right extremism. And from the tiny Italian town of Sesto to leading Generation Next, a new champion of Grand Slam tennis is crowned. I'm Janice Petersen. This is SBS World News. Good evening. President Joe Biden has vowed to respond after 3 US service members were killed and 34 wounded in a drone strike on US forces in the Middle East. The attack targeted a strategically important US base known as Tower 22 in northeast Jordan, which borders Syria and Iraq. Mr. Biden blamed the attack on Iran-backed militias and said the US will respond at a time and in a manner of its choosing.
The drone is said to have struck the living quarters on the base, which houses around 350 troops involved in the fight against IS militants. Tower 22 is close to the Al-Tanf garrison across the border in Syria. Iran-backed militias have stepped up attacks on US troops in the region, launching more than 150 strikes since the outbreak of the Hamas-Israel war. But these are the first fatalities from a drone strike. Speaking at a function in South Carolina, President Joe Biden said it had been a tough night.
We lost 3 brave souls in an attack on one of our bases.
Yes.
I'd ask you for a moment of silence for all 3 of those small souls. And we shall respond.
Now he must decide just how far he will go.
It's not necessarily a tipping point into uncontrolled escalation between the United States and Iran, but it's another very dangerous step because, as I say, the US will have to respond even more strongly than it's done to previous attacks.
With tensions high across the Middle East, the White House has been careful to avoid an escalation. Hours before the attack, the US's top military officer was asked what he would say to those calling for tougher action against Tehran.
I would also ask, do they want a broader conflict? Do you want us in a full-scale war?
Republicans seized on the attack as evidence of Mr. Biden's failure to confront Iran. Former President Donald Trump said the attack was another consequence of what he called Mr. Biden's weakness and surrender. The Senate Minority Leader adding, the entire world now watches for signs that he's finally prepared to exercise American strength. One senator, Lindsey Graham, said, hit Iran now, hit them hard. Presidential candidate Nikki Haley adding, it's the only way to prevent further war. Anything less will confirm Joe Biden as a coward, another senator said. Analysts say a direct strike on Iran is unlikely at this stage.
I don't anticipate that we will see the Pentagon go that far, because again, that would certainly augur more all-out conflict in a way that I don't believe that this administration wants.
As Mr. Biden and his security advisors contemplate their next move, they'll be mindful that airstrikes have failed to deter attacks on shipping by Houthi rebels in Yemen, another force backed by Iran. A tanker was set ablaze last week in the Gulf of Aden. And yesterday, a British warship, HMS Diamond, was forced to shoot down a Houthi drone. The US mulling its options in increasingly troubled waters. Nick Wells, SBS World News.
And in developing news, Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen say they fired a rocket at a US warship as it moved through the Gulf of Aden yesterday. Senior officials have met for talks initiated by the US, Qatar and Egypt to broker a hostage deal between Israel and Hamas. Momentum seemingly building as domestic pressure mounts on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to get the remaining 136 hostages home.
on the move in search of relative safety. According to the UN, 1.9 million people, or 85% of Gaza's population, have been displaced amid Israel's military operations. Anxiety heightened following news at least 9 countries, including Australia and the US, have decided to suspend funding to the United Nations Relief and Work Agency over allegations a dozen staff were involved in the Hamas attacks of October 7.
الأنوروا هي طب مين بده يطعمينا مين بده يشربنا بعد الحرب وبعد يعني والله يكون معي للناس ايش بدي اقول لك
انا ايش ذنبي كطفله فلسطينيه انه ما اطلق هذه المساعدات ايش ذنبي اعيش في هذا الرعب في هذه الخيم اللي احنا مش عارفين لا ناكل ولا نشرب قاعدين بنجوع بنعطش.
The move by Western nations condemned during an emergency meeting of representatives of the Arab League in Cairo, as well as by the Palestinian Prime Minister.
This measure is extremely dangerous, and it is our hope that it will be reversed. The suspension of aid is in line with the Israeli plans for the forced evacuation of our people from Gaza into Egypt.
Protests continue outside the residence of the Israeli Prime Minister, calling for the immediate return of more than 100 hostages who remain in Gaza. According to US officials who spoke to the Associated Press on the grounds of anonymity, progress is being made on a 2-phase deal to pause Israel's military operations. The first allowing the release of the remaining women, elderly and wounded hostages before a second phase to release men and Israeli soldiers. The information coming before talks in Paris, attended by the CIA director, the head of Israel's Mossad intelligence agency, the Qatari Prime Minister and Egyptian intelligence chief, among others. A statement from the Israeli Prime Minister's office defined the meeting as constructive, but went on to say there are still significant gaps which the sides will continue to discuss at additional mutual meetings to be held this week. For now, Israel is standing firm.
אנחנו נלך ונעמיק ונמשיך, זה קורה עכשיו. במרחב ח'אן יונס המערבי נכנעים הרבה מאוד מחבלים, גם במקומות אחרים. וזה ילך ויתגבר ואתם תראו את זה, אנחנו כולנו נראה את זה בימים הקרובים, כי אין לנו שום אלטרנטיבה.
The defence minister saying Israel has, quote, no moral right to stop looking for hostages. Tanya Dandrinos, SBS World News.
IS has claimed responsibility for a church service shooting in Istanbul, which left 1 man dead. Turkish authorities say they've since caught up with the 2 perpetrators, describing both as members of the terror group.
Sunday Mass in Istanbul, turning into a scene of terror. CCTV capturing the moment 2 masked gunmen entered the Santa Maria Catholic Church and opened fire on its congregation, killing a 52-year-old man before walking out the front doors.
Kilise hedefti. Kendisi hiçbir şekilde hedef değildi. Hiçbir şekilde politikayla veya bir örgütle bağlantısı yoktu. Zaten zihinsel engelliydi kendisi.
Bedeller adeta ödetiyor.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan telling the church priest the attackers would be caught within the day. Turkish security forces say they later raided 30 locations and detained 47 people, including the pair accused of carrying out the attack.
Zanlıların her ikisinin de
Both of the suspects are foreign nationals. We consider that these 2 foreign nationals, one from Tajikistan and the other from Russia, are members of Islamic State.
IS later took to Telegram to claim responsibility for the shooting, saying it was done in response to the group's recent calls for attacks against Christians and Jews. From the Vatican, Pope Francis leading prayers for the victim.
Esprimo la mia vicinanza alla comunità della Chiesa Santa Maria Draperis a Istanbul, che durante la messa ha subito un attacco armato.
Turkish authorities have been conducting sweeping raids targeting suspected IS members in recent months, arresting more than 300 people in one operation alone. Claudia Farhat, SBS World News.
Thousands of people across Germany have protested against the rise of the far right. The demonstrations followed reports that right-wing extremists had met with the Alternative for Deutschland party to discuss the deportation of millions of migrants, including some with German citizenship.
In her 80s, but undaunted by a crowd, Renata speaks at one of the many protests sweeping Germany. She survived the Holocaust. Many of her Jewish family did not.
It's very important that we Jews raise our voice. The situation in Germany has become threatening because of Alternative for Deutschland and other far-right groups, not just for us Jews.
These demos were sparked by revelations that senior figures from the Alternative for Deutschland party met with right-wing extremists, where the mass deportation of asylum seekers and so-called non-Germans was allegedly discussed.
There's a debate about whether to ban the AFD or deprive them of state funding. Where do you stand on that?
I'm against the ban of AFD. I think we have to tackle them on a political way, because if we ban them, I fear that they attract more attention and that more people try to support them.
For all these shows of staunch mass resistance against the AFD, there is great uncertainty, even a nervousness about how to tackle the rise of the far right, particularly here in Germany's east.
A sense of disaffection lingers in the once communist part of this country, where the AFD's leading the polls ahead of key elections.
They never had a chance to be in power because no one wants to work with them. Maybe if they got into power, it would be good for us.
The AFD, designated by domestic intelligence as extremist in Saxony, says it's being smeared by its opponents.
What do you think about the fact there are hundreds of thousands of people protesting against your party, and some people at those demonstrations saying they're scared by what they've heard?
We're aware of it, but we believe that many of these demonstrators don't know our program. We're in the absurd situation where people demonstrate with the government against the opposition. That's unheard of.
This city of Chemnitz was once named after Karl Marx. That was reversed, but the monument remains. The father of communism now watching over the rise of the far right.
Jessica Parker with that report. Ukraine's security services have arrested 5 people accused of embezzling almost $60 million earmarked to buy artillery shells for the war with Russia. The money was paid in full to Ukrainian arms firm Lviv Arsenal in August last year in a contract for 100,000 mortar shells. The firm, though, failed to deliver any weapons and allegedly diverted some of the cash to a bank account in the Balkans. It's alleged employees from the arms firm conspired with 2 Ukrainian Ministry of Defence officials over the plot. Coming up, Australia courts 2 of its biggest energy customers and promotes the new critical minerals sector. Also, childcare crisis, why a new report says services are failing many families. And China's faltering property market giant Evergrande ordered into liquidation. The federal government is seeking to preserve trade ties with 2 of its largest energy export markets, Japan and South Korea. Resources Minister Madeleine King is in Tokyo in a bid to reinforce Australia's reputation as a stable and reliable partner amid growing energy security fears. Japan and South Korea are the country's 2nd and 3rd largest resources and energy markets, respectively. In 2023, Australia supplied 40% of Japan's gas. In total, gas, iron ore and coal exports to the country were worth $99 billion. But resources poor Japan has repeatedly raised concerns over the reliability of Australian gas. This is in part due to delays in gas projects as well as policy changes introduced under the Albanese government to ensure tighter controls on gas exporters. It comes as Japan seeks to accelerate its clean energy transition. Last year, the country announced plans to invest $1.5 trillion over 15 years to supply the domestic market with hydrogen energy. Minister King says Australia can play a key role in that clean energy transition.
The Australian government values the trust that Japan has placed in Australia to keep the lights on in Japan, as well as to help support the decarbonisation of the Japanese economy. As we look to the future, I want to assure our friends in Japan that Australia will remain a trusted and reliable partner on gas.
Minister King is expected to visit Seoul later this week, and for more on what that means, I've been speaking to reporter Chris Gilbert in Tokyo. Good evening, Chris. Just how crucial is this visit by the Resources Minister in protecting the trade relationship between Australia and Japan?
Well, it's absolutely crucial. Minister King said herself in her speech here at the Australian Embassy that, you know, she's only been in the portfolio for a short time and she really wants to reconcile the relationship, bring these two countries closer together, because the relationship has been in place for 60 years. It's worth $250 billion to Australia in 2023. It's worth 30% of Japan's total energy that it imports from overseas. And now, as both countries look to face a greener future and their 2050 carbon neutrality goals, they have to figure out a new path forward, and so this is the first step along that path.
Tell us more about the sticking points then. What do you see as the major concerns expressed by the Japanese government and industry stakeholders over Australia as a major supplier of energy?
Yeah, well, there was certainly an elephant in the room when Minister King frequently and repeatedly said the word reliable in relation to Australia's energy supply to Japan, because there was a moment in 2022 when Australia had to use it for its own domestic use and Japan felt somewhat shortchanged. Minister King brought that up and said, look, we are going to be reliable, not just for gas and coal in the future, but for rare earths, and that Japan, as it looks to meet its carbon neutrality goals, can use Australian rare earths to make the material it needs, such as green batteries, solar and wind facilities that it's building off its coast in the future. And so it's really about that reliable relationship.
And does Japan see Australia as playing a key role in its clean energy transition?
Well, Japan is in the market for these resources. It has two former suppliers it can't really use anymore, one being Russia, which of course is under increasingly heavy sanctions, the other being China. And Japan, as a G7 member, has agreed to, quote, de-risk its relationship with China. Beijing is Australia's main competitor for the supply of rare earths internationally, and so it has a great shot. The relationship is there of 60 years. These two countries know how to do business with each other, and so looking into the future, there is every prospect and potential for this relationship to transition towards a green one and keep the resources flying from Australia into Tokyo.
Chris Gilbert, thanks so much for that update from Tokyo. North Korea says it's tested newly developed strategic cruise missiles fired from submarines, with leader Kim Jong-un personally overseeing the launches. Experts have long questioned whether the country actually has the capability to successfully use such long-range weapons. It's the second missile test Pyongyang has reported in less than a week. Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso say they're leaving the Economic Community of West African States, known as ECOWAS. The junta-led country's decision to leave comes after ECOWAS urged the states to return to constitutional order. The group has suspended the countries before after recent military coups. The three states also cut military and other ties with France and have turned to Russia for security support. A memorial event has been held in Ukraine's capital to pay tribute to a well-known poet killed earlier this month. 32-year-old Maxim Kritsov joins a growing list of artists who have died fighting in the war.
Gathered to remember the life and work of poet and soldier Maxim Kritsov, killed in action just a few weeks earlier. known simply to his friends and fans by his nickname Dali.
He was such a bright person who is not with us anymore, but you can feel his soul and spirit is still with us to give inspiration to others.
This exhibition, documenting life on the front line, was already being planned when he was killed. Some of the photos left without captions that he never got to write. Effectively, his last, posthumous and incomplete work.
Through his photographs, he showed us his journey. His poetry is that of a person who spent years at war while still preserving his humanity.
Dali joins a growing list of prominent artists and writers killed in this war. Writer Victoria Amelina, who died from injuries sustained in a rocket attack on this restaurant in Kramatorsk last summer. Poet and novelist Ihor Misyak was serving as a paramedic when he was killed last year. And children's author Volodymyr Vakulenko, who was abducted from his occupied village at the start of the war and whose remains were later discovered at a mass burial site.
In Ukraine's centuries-long struggle to establish a distinctive national identity, literature has always played a significant role, and never more so since Russia's full-scale invasion nearly 2 years ago that threatened the country's very existence.
That threat has helped drive a resurgent cultural interest.
That's a positive trend, with people now more interested, more thoughtful, more conscious about Ukrainian culture.
On stage, Dali's father, reading the words his son left behind.
Rob McBride reporting there from Kiev. Climate change activists have thrown soup on the Mona Lisa at the Louvre Museum in Paris. This video posted on social media shows two women throwing red soup onto the protective glass of Leonardo da Vinci's painting. The protesters shouting that they wanted to highlight the need to protect the environment and sources of food. French farmers have also been protesting for days against issues such as low wages. Student visa approval numbers are set to drop by up to 90,000 as the number of rejected applications increases. While more than 570,000 visas were approved last financial year, almost 20% of all applicants were knocked back. The government says it's focusing on genuine claims and a higher quality of applicant, while also trying to drive down net migration. Immigration experts say while visa refusal numbers are higher, there are also more applicants compared to previous years.
We're refusing massive numbers of students in order to manage net migration down. And we're using very subjective criteria to refuse those visas. That is usually a reflection of poor visa design, and that's what the government's got to start to address. It has started to take steps in the last 6 months of 2023, but I suspect there is more to be done.
A coronial inquest has begun into the death of teenager Jai Wright. The 16-year-old died after the trail bike he was riding collided with an unmarked police car in Sydney's inner suburbs. The inquest will examine the circumstances surrounding his death and the police officers involved. His family hope it will bring them the answers they've been searching for. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are warned that the following story contains images of someone who has died.
A ceremonial start as family and friends gather at the doorstep of the Coroner's Court in Sydney, another step in their long quest for answers into the death of Jai Wright.
We've come here with a lot of hope that we'll get truth, and then once we've got our truth, we then want to move on to getting some justice.
It's been almost 2 years since the 16-year-old was seriously injured after the trail bike he was riding collided with an unmarked police car at an intersection in Sydney's inner suburbs. He died a day later at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital on the 20th of February 2022. In an opening statement today, counsel assisting the coroner said there were 3 unmarked police cars in the area responding to reports of 2 stolen vehicles and a trail bike matching the one the teenager was riding. The cars were told to be in the area. The instruction back to them was not to pursue. We will hear whether they were involved in a pursuit. The State Coroner, Teresa O'Sullivan, will also consider the driving history of the police officers involved, including an incident a month earlier involving one of the officers driving the car that collided with Jai. The inquest is set down for 10 days, during which 17 witnesses are expected to be called, including the police officer that was behind the wheel of the unmarked vehicle when it was struck. He will give evidence later this week. Emma Kellaway, SBS World News.
The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission is calling on all levels of government to intervene in the childcare sector so that all families can access services. After a year-long review, the ACCC found that many households, well, childcare is neither affordable nor accessible. It also found that the government's childcare subsidies have done little to keep childcare fees down.
As a mother, educator and manager, Jessie Seller knows how crucial early childhood services are.
I know how important childcare was for my son, and knowing that he was in a safe environment, ultimately that is what early childcare providers are doing, is setting children up to be on that journey, creating the foundations for them.
Ms Seller has worked in the childcare industry for over 15 years and says parents and staff are facing increasing pressures.
Rising inflation, our products that we're on supplying in terms of nappies, formula.
The ACCC report found that affordability of childcare services improved immediately after cheaper childcare reforms took effect in July 2023. It did reduce costs, with the largest reduction for low-income earners, but the affordability benefits eroded by fee increases. Childcare fees rose by 22.8% between 2018 and 2022, compared to an average of 6.2% for other developed nations.
One-size-fits-all approach is not able to address all the different circumstances and locations. We have recommended a range of different regulatory reforms and target support to those most disadvantaged families.
The report also found low-income earners, those in regional areas and Indigenous communities struggled the most when it comes to affordability and access. The report made 8 recommendations, including changes to the childcare subsidy and hourly rate cap, improving the retention of educators, more support for Aboriginal organisations and a market role to monitor, regulate and shape childcare markets.
We need a system reform that is going to work for children, for parents, and ensure that every child, no matter who they are, has access to quality early childhood education and care.
Significant work to be done that childcare workers say are crucial for the country's future, because how these centres are run will impact the next generation. Danielle Robertson, SBS World News.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers has dismissed suggestions that the government's change in position on Stage 3 tax cuts could lead to other changes, like winding back tax concessions for property investors. Mr Chalmers says Labor is not considering changes to negative gearing.
The Prime Minister on centre court.
So the Honourable Anthony Albanese.
Met by a tough crowd.
Victorian Premier, the Honourable Ben Carroll.
But batting off the public reception.
Do you have thick skin, Anthony, or does that still sort of get to you? I mean, a crowd of people booing, you know?
Oh, no, it's an Australian tradition.
I don't think we should read too much into it.
A week after going back on an election promise to change the Stage 3 tax cuts, Mr Albanese receiving some support off the court.
Honestly, what are they booing him for? Because, well, we've got a heap of rich people over there watching the tennis finals there, and they've had a bit of their tax taken off them.
As the Treasurer continues to tout Labor's revamped plan.
Everyone gets a tax cut, but there is a bigger tax cut for more people to help with the cost of living.
Brushing off criticism it will fuel inflation, economists are divided.
It won't be a stimulus. We have the view that this won't be adding inflationary pressures in the coming year.
Ahead of the first parliamentary sitting next week, the government is facing calls for more support to ease cost of living pressure.
Continue to put pressure on energy prices, and
You do that by continuing to ensure that we're investing in the renewable energy, like the more renewable energy, the cheaper the cost of electricity.
While the business lobby will ask the Fair Work Commission to reduce the size of this year's increase in the minimum wage in response to the changes.
Our tax cut should be on top of a decent increase in the minimum wage, not instead of one.
In making the case for these changes, Labor is also dealing with questions of trust and whether this could lead to another change of position. The Treasurer has dismissed suggestions he'll revisit a contentious policy of unwinding negative gearing.
We're not contemplating or considering resurrecting the policies that we took to the 2019 election.
Though there is some support in Parliament.
Take it to an election and show some courage, but quite frankly, after the stage 3 tax cuts, I think you'll find him withdraw a little bit.
But selling the new stage 3 policy appears to be more than enough. Pablo Vinales, SBS World News.
The New South Wales government planned to explicitly outlaw the Nazi salute after neo-Nazis staged a series of demonstrations in Sydney over the long weekend. Police were called to break up a neo-Nazi gathering on Sydney's North Shore on Sunday and disrupted plans for about 60 men to rally in the city's centre. Premier Chris Minns says ensuring community safety is the government's top priority.
If that legal barrier isn't cleared, we will move legislation to outlaw racist Nazi ideology and white power symbols in New South Wales. People have every right to feel safe in their community.
While Nazi symbolism is outlawed in New South Wales, there's no law explicitly banning the Nazi salute. The RSPCA says it's devastated by a Victorian government decision not to proceed with a ban on recreational duck hunting. Ministers emerged from a 4-hour cabinet meeting to confirm that they had rejected the recommendation of a parliamentary inquiry that a ban should be imposed. The government's announced an 8-week season from the 10th of April with new mandatory training and testing requirements for hunters. Animal rights groups say more than 300,000 native birds were killed during last year's shortened Victorian duck hunting season, with tens of thousands more suffering serious injuries. Queensland, New South Wales and Western Australia have all banned the practice. Australia continues to report a nationwide teacher shortage just as students return to the classroom. There have been efforts at the state and federal levels to tackle the shortages, but the new school year is starting without enough teachers.
Terry Moriarty retired in 2008 after more than 50 years as a maths teacher. Now 75, he's again preparing to head back to the classroom as a casual teacher.
That hasn't happened at the start of the year before.
Thousands of retired teachers are being called on amid a critical workforce shortage across primary and secondary schools.
We're still getting asked, whereas we thought that perhaps by now we would have reached our use-by date.
Almost 2,000 full-time teaching positions were left unfilled in New South Wales classrooms at the end of last year. A survey finding 10,000 classes across the state had to be merged or cancelled.
I have been asked to sit in a library with another teacher and look after 3 or 4 classes in the library and walk through the hall and see it's set up to take 4 classes at a time with a couple of teachers when things get critical. So that's been ongoing for the last couple of years.
In regional areas, the shortages are even worse.
I have never seen anything like it in my 39 years of teaching and 25 or 26 in Australia, where I am seeing early career, mid-career and late career teachers making the decision to leave the profession because they are feeling the stress to such a great degree that it is impacting on their health and well-being.
Many teachers are saying enough is enough. I can no longer work 56 hours per week every week, and the complexity of students who are not being provided with the support that they need is increasing.
Teachers in New South Wales received a pay rise last year, becoming the best paid in the country. There are also federal scholarships, grants and HECS debt discounts on offer to make teaching more attractive. Teaching student Chelsea Roberts said she could see teacher burnout during her recent placement in regional Victoria.
Call it naive, but we go in with all these hopes and dreams. And if you've got a mentor who's burnt out, you can see how they've got to that point, but it's made me think, when I get into this profession, will it take over my home time? Will it, we'll have all this extra work to do because roles aren't being filled.
A spokesperson for the Federal Department of Education said in a statement, Australia does have a shortage of teachers that has been 10 years in the making, and it will take time to fix. Pay is part of it, but so is workload and so is teacher training. Nearly $3.5 million of federal funding going towards extra university places, scholarships and a national campaign to elevate the teaching profession. Alexandra Jones, SBS World News.
The federal government will mark 40 years of Medicare with a new commemorative card. Australia's universal healthcare system was introduced by Prime Minister Bob Hawke in 1984 to improve affordability and access to healthcare. Health Minister Mark Butler unveiled the commemorative cards, which will be issued this year. Well, a Hong Kong court has ordered the liquidation of embattled Chinese property giant Evergrande. Rochelle Harrison-Pless joins us with more details. So, Rochelle, this could carry global economic impacts as well, including on the Australian export industry.
Janice, China Evergrande is the world's most indebted property developer, owing around $300 billion or 455 billion Australian, after initially defaulting on payments back in 2021. Since then, it's failed to reach a debt restructuring plan, sending ripples through financial markets. It comes at a time when the country is already battling low consumer spending, an ageing population and high youth unemployment. As Australia's largest trading partner, experts say if the liquidation goes ahead, it could carry ramifications for Australia's economy by weakening demand for exports.
This news about an impending collapse of Evergrande, has sent some shockwaves through financial markets, and fears that the property market crash could impact commodity prices. Obviously, we're a massive exporter of iron ore, and China being the largest buyer of that. Red dirt, black gold, and LNG are massive exports for Australia, and China is the largest consumer of that.
Evergrande still has the option to appeal the liquidation order and avoid an investigation. But for now, people will be looking to Chinese policymakers to see if they'll step in to contain the crisis. Trading in Evergrande shares was suspended earlier today after the stock plummeted 21%. Closer to home, the Australian stock market has enjoyed another day of solid gains, pushing it within about 50 points of an all-time record. Energy stocks buoyed the index alongside the real estate sector, while BHP fell on reports that a Brazilian federal judge ordered it to pay $14.7 billion in damages relating to a 2015 deadly dams disaster. Tech stocks were also down as investors await earnings updates from mega cap players in the US later this week. And the Australian dollar moved higher against the greenback ahead of Thursday's rates decision over there. Australia's recent wild weather could place upward pressure on insurance prices as major retailers battle rising costs. Suncorp says it expects damages to total $578 million, stemming from 6 major incidents over the past few months. Those include Cyclone Jasper and the East Coast storms. The warning comes ahead of the upcoming February reporting season. That also prompted Woolworths Group, which includes Big W, to flag around $1.7 billion in write-downs today. It follows softer trade conditions in New Zealand and losses from its holding in Dan Murphy's parent company, Endeavour Group. Australia's $212 billion future fund has appointed a new chair, replacing Peter Costello, who set up the fund during his time as Treasurer. Former ACTU Secretary and Labor Minister Greg Combet will take the role from mid-year. Mr Combet has been chairman of the government's Net Zero Economy Agency, tasked with the transition to a zero-carbon energy system. Former Macquarie banker Mary Reemst will fill an interim position from February.
We cherish the Future Fund's independence and we cherish its commercial focus, and we don't want to mess with that. What we want to do here is to make sure that the Future Fund is an important economic and financial institution into the future, The first step in ensuring that is making sure that we get this fresh thinking and this fresh leadership.
The government has also appointed company directors Nicola Wakefield Evans and Rosemary Vilgan to the board for 5-year terms as part of a push to improve gender representation. Australia has a new economic leader in the latest State of the States report from CommSec. It found South Australia led the nation for the first time in the 15-year history of the index. New South Wales and Victoria tied in second, while Queensland dropped to 7th place. The festival state outperformed in 4 of the 8 categories on a relative population boom.
That's creating demand for homes, buying or building homes, and creating overall strength in terms of economic growth.
CommSec says the jobless rate remains low across all states and territories, indicating that economic growth is poised to return. And rising tensions in the Middle East could see petrol prices climb. The cost of oil rose 6% over the past week to be around $84 per barrel. It comes amid growing calls for retaliation against Iran after the death of 3 US soldiers. Experts say the conflict could cause disruptions to the Hormuz Strait, which controls around 15 to 20% of global oil supply.
We could see oil prices go north of 90, and that is where we could see petrol prices in Australia reflect that. And 90 is probably the mark where you're touch and go with $2 a litre. But once you get past 90, you're in the 95 territory or even potentially above. That has big implications, which could push it above 2.
The Australian Institute of Petroleum says petrol prices moved higher over the past week, reaching 188.5 cents for unleaded and remain higher for diesel at 194.6 cents. Janice.
More pain at the pump. We don't like that. Thanks, Rochelle. Well, coming up, Italians celebrate their new Grand Slam tennis champion. And we'll hear from the tennis history maker whose made Italy so proud. Jannik Sinner has rewritten the tennis history books after winning the Australian Open. His remarkable comeback victory against Daniil Medvedev on Sunday night makes him the event's first Italian champion.
Basking in the glory under the Melbourne sun, Jannik Sinner is a man still coming to terms with last night's heroics.
I didn't sleep much, but it's, great emotions, slowly realizing what I've done. It's a great achievement for me and my team, so really happy to be here.
And for a long time, the final wasn't going Sinner's way. His opponent, Daniil Medvedev, came out determined to avoid a third runners-up finish.
And Medvedev taking charge of this final. He's got the second set.
Taking the first 2 sets, the Russian needed just one more. But having spent more time on court than any other player at a major tournament, Medvedev started to falter.
And he's got it. He's back in this match. What an effort from Jannik Sinner.
Claiming the 4th set to square the match up, Sinner's belief only grew. The momentum was firmly with the Italian. And with more than 24 hours of court time this tournament, it seemed time was up for Medvedev. The Russian with nothing left to give, while Sinner stormed to victory.
Sinner seals the deal with an epic comeback, and he is the Australian Open champion.
Medvedev could at least see a silver lining to another final defeat.
Just want to thank everyone. It's been honestly amazing 2 weeks. It always hurts to lose in the final, but probably being in the final is better than losing before, so.
Elation for Sinner from inside the arena and out to his hometown of Sesto, population 2,000. The Italian Prime Minister joining in the praise, calling him a true champion. As the youngest Italian to win a Grand Slam singles title, Sinner has rewritten the tennis history books.
There were obviously so many emotions in my head, the hard work and the sacrifices I've done throughout my my career, and sharing this moment with my team was maybe the best feeling.
With Jannik Sinner's miracle comeback victory at the Australian Open last night, he became the first Italian man or woman to win the tournament, and it wasn't lost on Melbourne's Italian community.
You know, it means a lot. You know, I'm Italian, so yeah, it's just great. Great to see him win.
I was dying, yeah, but I know how Italians are. They never give up anyway.
Jannik Sinner is already promising to come back even better, and his win was popular. Tennis Australia confirmed the Open blitzed its previous attendance record, topping 3 million people for the first time. Tysok Husey, SBS World News.
Super Bowl 58 will see the defending champs, the Kansas City Chiefs, take on the San Francisco 49ers in Las Vegas next month. Star players Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce combining for the first touchdown in a 17-10 win over the Baltimore Ravens. It'll be Kansas City's 4th Super Bowl in 5 seasons. The 49ers needed a remarkable comeback to beat the Detroit Lions, recovering from 17 points down at halftime to come back and win 34-31. The Chiefs versus the 49ers will be a repeat of the 2020 Super Bowl. The Socceroos will play either Saudi Arabia or South Korea in the quarterfinals of the Asian Cup. Australia storms through the last 8 in Doha after a 4-0 win over Indonesia.
Australia's message before this match was no complacency, even against a team ranked 121 places lower that qualified for the round of 16 despite losing 2 of its 3 group games. That caution was justified when Indonesia threatened to score early on. But this was no David v Goliath story. An own goal, putting the Socceroos ahead,
Deflection goes into the back of the net.
And Australia's lead was 2-0 by half-time.
Into the back stick by Martin Boyle.
Indonesia managed only 1 shot on target all match. Australia had 4, and that's how many goals they ended up with.
And that will do it.
Second half substitute Craig Goodwin, back from injury, and Harry Souttar also finding the back of the net before the final whistle.
Harry Souttar got the final touch.
I haven't practiced once defensively since England. It's been all about, attacking patterns and penetrating runs and getting men in the box. And, once you get the boys start believing it, then it starts working.
Next up, a step up in class with a quarter-final against either Saudi Arabia or South Korea, who play on Wednesday. Alex Thomas, SBS World News.
And Australia has confirmed its status as the world's best netball team after lifting the Nations Cup in England. The Diamonds won every game at the event, overwhelming the hosts in the final. Australia finished 69-49, which was the nation's biggest win over England since 2016. Star goal shooter Sophie Garvin was player of the match after making a remarkable 31 of her 32 goal attempts. Well, coming up, the weather details and the reaction to Taylor Swift's deep-fake hijacked identity. To the weather forecast now, and a trough over Queensland and northeastern New South Wales will head southward, bringing high humidity as well as showers and storms. Easterly winds are expected to strengthen and heat up over the southwest of Western Australia. To the major centres now, a shower or 2 for Sydney, cloudy skies in Canberra, partly cloudy in Melbourne. The sun will be out in Hobart, overcast and grey in Adelaide, sunshine ahead for Perth, a shower or 2 in Darwin, and rain and a possible storm with heavy falls ahead for Brisbane. Checking conditions further afield now, unsettled and thundery in Nundy. Fine weather on the way for Port Vila. A few showers in Auckland and partly cloudy in Wellington. To Southeast Asia now, overcast skies in Phnom Penh, partly cloudy in Kuala Lumpur, thunder in Singapore and cloudy for Denpasar. Let's head further north now. Cloudy skies ahead for Beijing. It'll be fine and bright in Tokyo, drizzle in Shanghai and Hong Kong, and cloudy skies in Hanoi. Heading west now, rain ahead for Beirut, partly cloudy in Baghdad, foggy in New Delhi, and some rain ahead for Islamabad. To Europe now, wet and rainy in Stockholm, snowfalls across Moscow, fine and sunny in Warsaw and Paris, cloudy in Rome and a few showers ahead for Istanbul. To Africa now, grey and cloudy in Algiers, overcast too in Dakar and Lagos, some showers to hit Nairobi and thunderstorms in Johannesburg, heading for a top of 29 degrees there. To South America, partly cloudy in Caracas and Bogotá, grey skies in Lima and Buenos Aires with a top of 34 and fine weather in Santiago. And for North America, showers ahead for Vancouver, partly cloudy in New York, fine weather in LA and cloudy in Mexico City. Well, American artist Taylor Swift is now unsearchable on X, formerly Twitter, after explicit fake images went viral. The social media platform blocked all users to look up her name and say it has a zero tolerance for such content. Swift's experience has alarmed the White House, which is also calling for Congress to take legislative action on regulating AI. Recapping our top story now, and US President Joe Biden has vowed to respond after 3 US service members were killed and 34 others injured in a drone strike in Jordan. The attack targeted a strategically important US airbase in Jordan's northeast, near the borders with Syria and Iraq. Mr. Biden blamed the attack on Iran-backed militias. That is the world this Monday. You can catch up on our bulletins on SBS On Demand, and for the top stories, head to the SBS News website. Naveen Razik will be back with our next bulletin. That's at 10 tonight. Till then, from the World News team, good night.